Hey everybody, it's Paul.
And Steve. And welcome back to the channel. We're so excited that you're here. Thanks for all of your comments. Here Paul and I discuss just anything under the sun, and we've had a great time talking about the variety of lists that we've talked about to this point, and hearing from you, your ideas and your thoughts has been so helpful for us to give us not only things that we can talk about, but also really open up our own knowledge and understanding of where you are and what you've experienced and enjoyed. So today we're back for another list, and as you know, Paul and I grew up in the 80s, and so a lot of these lists have to do with the 80s. And today we're going to be talking about the worst things from the 1980s. So a lot of these lists are what are the best of things, but what are the worst of the 1980s?
Yeah, and there were a few. As great as the 80s were, there are some things that that weren't so great.
Weren't so great, absolutely.
About the 80s.
Yes, that's right.
So I think this is going to be a fun one, and it's interesting because some of the comments have been asked us. We'll discuss the flip side.
That's right.
Talk about okay, what didn't you like?
That's right. Books that we have liked, and then what books have you not liked?
Right.
So here we are with the worst of the 80s.
Worst of the 80s. All right. So I'll get us started.
Okay.
I've got a few that I feel like are specific to the 80s. Yeah. Public service announcements.
Oh my goodness! I didn't even think of that.
I didn't either. But like when I was thinking about this, like it just popped into my head. Yeah. And I remember watching like after school cartoons. Like we'd get out of school at 3:00, and if I ran as fast as I could, I lived about 5 minutes away at a fast sprint from the school, and I could get home right for the first commercial break of Scooby-Doo. And so I was in there. The gang would be knee deep into a haunted house, trying to figure out who's doing this, or is it a real haunted house? And we'd get this public service announcement about stranger danger, anything. And I mean, it was like they were trying to scare you.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes that worked.
Sometimes it worked.
Usually not.
Usually not. And as I got older, they got just more and more comical in just how overacted they were, how ham-handed the message was.
That's right.
And really, I feel like they weren't trying to teach you to think for yourself. They were really just trying to get you to do what they wanted you to do.
That's right.
Whatever that was. Now, some things, yes. I mean, I needed to be protected from some things. Absolutely. But I don't think I ever would have gone and done any of the things had they warned me about. No. Had they just remained quiet about it.
And they did, in those PSAs, they didn't even use like celebrities. At least in some of the contemporary PSAs, they'll have a celebrity doing something. Mm-hmm. These were people that had just walked in off the street and had never even taken an acting class or never knew what they were doing in terms of acting. So it was bad acting, over the top messages, and kind of the beginning of the nanny state idea, I guess. But it was. Those were tough. I'm glad you mentioned that. I hadn't thought about. I think I blocked them out of my mind.
And it really with watching cartoons or like some of the rerun shows like I Love Lucy or whatever, you're just in that mode of, okay, I'm watching this cool show. It's funny, it's entertaining. Yeah. The commercials I get are going to be for fast food or for toys.
Or toys, right?
Because they knew who was watching at that hour. Yep. And then you get the public service, and it would just be an interruption in the flow of everything.
Right. A downer.
Yeah, just take you out of all that. Like, gotta go eat a bowl full of sugar.
Yeah, that's exactly.
just to get back to what you can keep.
The only way, absolutely. That's a really good one.
Interestingly enough, our PSAs now are against sugar.
Are against sugar, which is what they were giving us.
I know.
Just pumping us full of all through the 80s. So that's a good one. That was something really bad about the 80s, no doubt. Okay, so I'm going to say my first thing that was bad, one of the worst things in the 1980s, were phones with cords.
Oh, yeah.
Phones with cords. So we had a phone that hung on the wall. Mm-hmm. It wasn't cordless, so you couldn't carry it anywhere. When they eventually did come out with cordless phones in the late 80s, you could only go about 7 feet anyway, and the antenna would not be. You'd have to pull the antenna up, and it still wouldn't work. But when you had a phone with a cord that hung on a wall, if you wanted to talk to somebody, if you want to talk to a girl, or a girl wanted to talk to a guy, you had to sneak around and pull it around the corner and try to find a place where you could, because you didn't have a phone in your room. I don't know if you did. We never had a phone in our room. You had one phone in the house, and it was attached to the wall, and it had a long cord. Mm-hmm. So the phones in the 1980s were just terrible. It was nice to have them, that you could call somebody, but there weren't a whole lot of people to call anyway, because on the other end, they they would have had to hide from their parents to talk on the phone as well. So
yeah, it was this goofball relationship with the phone. Like you loved having the phone because it was kind of the height of technology. Unless you had a computer in the house,
that's right.
It was kind of the height of technology, and it was a means of communicating with your friends or with girls or boys. Which was a big part of growing up for me, but yes, absolutely. It was that pull the phone around the corner, make like a fort out of the sofa cushions, and get my head inside with the phone.
That's right. And we didn't have like voicemail. Eventually, we had an answering machine, but that was late in the '80s. By the time we got an answering machine, and so if you called somebody and they weren't there, it just rang. And if you weren't home, you never knew anybody called you. Yeah. They did eventually invent star 69, where you could call and find out what the last number was that called you, but. Other than that, the phone was it was tough, and it was a novelty. So you could call to find out what time it was, which was one thing you could do on a phone. Is call somebody to find out what time it is and what the weather was going to be.
What the weather was going to be.
But the whole phone, it was this blessing and curse, and usually it was a curse.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but if I was going to call up a girl, like I had to work my nerve up.
Of course.
And like practice, like there was a couple times where you dial and you hit that last number and then
hang up. You can't do that anymore because it's caller ID, but it was. You wouldn't do that.
Yeah, the phone was a big deal.
It was
back then. It really was a blessing and a curse. You're absolutely
that's right. Caused more heartache.
That's a great one.
Yeah. So,
all right, my next one. All right, cars from the 1980s. They just didn't make good-looking cars in the 1980s. I think that a lot of that had to do with America coming out of the oil shortage in the 1970s, and gasoline prices really fluctuating. Right. Of course, now we understand what gasoline fluctuation is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we really get it now.
Because for those of you who don't remember the 80s, I mean, like gasoline was like I think 79 cents a gallon when I started driving.
Yep. We could on Friday nights when we would drive, you really could dig down in the seat and come up with enough money to cover the gas for cruising around that night. Easily.
But the cars in the 1980s they just didn't look good. The American cars didn't look good. The foreign cars didn't look good.
Looked even worse.
Yeah, a couple of the exotic cars in the 80s looked nice. I remember the Lamborghini Countach came out around then, and that was a sharp-looking car.
Yeah.
I still love that car.
And Magnum Pia's Ferrari, the 308, that looked fabulous. But I wasn't having one of those. I had a little bitty one that I drove around, Matchbox car, but that was it.
Yeah, we had to. I can't remember did the Pontiac Fiero come out in the 80s? Because that was an okay looking car.
That was a cool car. I can't remember. Maybe the late 80s.
And the Monte Carlo Supersport definitely came out in the late 80s. That was a good looking car too. But by and large,
they were bad.
Yeah,
they were bad. My first car was a 1982 Mercury Zephyr.
Okay,
it was awful. It was absolute. Now Ginger's first car was a Gremlin, which was awful.
Those were even worse.
And it was green. It was terrible. It was absolutely awful. And that was, that and the AMC Pacer, they blew up all the time and killed people and all. But those were tough. So
now Shannon, her first car, she learned on a Volkswagen Beetle, like a 1968 Volkswagen Beetle, manual steering, manual transmission. But then she saved up. Her first car was a brand new car, a Mazda MX, a Mazda 3 or something like that. Cute little car.
Good for her.
Yeah. Yes, her first car was a brand new car. My first car was an Eagle Summit, which was a car company that's no longer around.
No, AMC Eagle.
Yeah. That car had a lot of problems.
And
basically it was a Ford Taurus clone.
Oh, right. Okay.
But it was what it was.
Yeah. I think they only made the Mercury Zephyr for maybe that 1 year, and then they realized, who was completely on LSD when we designed this thing. It was so bad. But when we went to look at the used cars, I think it was the first one I saw, and so I just said, let's buy that one. I was afraid if I didn't get the first car that my parents may not buy me another one. But it was bad. It was ugly. It was terrible. I was glad when it died.
And it's interesting now, like watching like these car auctions. You can sometimes find on the History Channel and stuff. You really don't see stuff from the 80s.
No,
nobody's collecting that.
No,
that I know of. I could be wrong. I'm really not a car guy, nor am I an auction car guy.
No, nobody's ever going to look back and say, I just restored this 1987 Ford Tempo. It's just never going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so the cars.
The cars were bad in the 80s. They really were.
Yeah.
No, that's
actually have a note here. The vehicles, not the band, because the band was awesome.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We're all going to drive. So, but that was the vehicles themselves were terrible.
Yeah.
All right. So my second, I think we're second, right?
I think so.
My second worst thing from the 1980s were the hairstyles.
Okay.
The hairstyles of the 80s. So for the girls, the big hair with the giant bangs that they would use an entire can of Aquanet to hold into place. So the big hair. Now the big hair on bands was great.
Oh yeah.
So a guy with big hair that played a guitar and sang in a rock band. Now that was cool. But the hairstyles that normal people wore, the mullets, the rat tails, the big hair. I think we probably won't be going back to the 80s when it comes to hairstyles.
I think a lot of the fashions, so I actually love a lot of the fashion stuff from the 80s. The big hair is one of the things I kind of like.
All right. Okay.
Again, because of the music.
Yeah.
But I think as a culture, we've just kind of moved away from all the effort needed to do all that.
Yeah.
And we're much more comfortable and casual now as a society in general.
Yeah. Now with the style, fashion from the 80s, a lot of that's coming back.
Yes.
And maybe we'll do a countdown of the the top fashion, whether it's the the pegged and the rolled jeans or popped collars. Even a lot of the music of the 80s. So those things, but hairstyles, I just don't see the big hair coming back.
I'm with you. I don't think it's going to come back because I think so much of the products, there was so many chemicals in the product that we didn't care about then because we really didn't know about, but we do care about that now.
Yeah, I think we probably will be seeing before long a commercial on television. If you used Aquanet in the 80s, you had big hair, you maybe do compensation.
You maybe do a call.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So the hairstyles. I don't look back fondly on the hairstyles from the 80s.
Okay.
My own or others.
So for me, that was always my struggle. Is I always had thick hair, and I used to keep it pretty long, but I didn't want to go through the effort to style it and do all that. So I could never get my hair to look good. So finally, when the Marines just shaved it all off, I just kept it that way.
Took good care of it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with you. I don't look back fondly on it because I would like to have nice looking hair, but I don't want the heat of it. And I don't want the work involved in it. So
no, I mean when you watch, say, the Karate Kid, and you see some really cool guys. Johnny's hairstyle in the Karate Kid was awesome, but I was never able to do that. So I would try to do the wings going back on the sides. But it never looked good. So I was glad to be done with it.
I think you need to have like the blonde hair and be like in that surf culture to kind of pull it off.
Absolutely, be ripped.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. So my number 3 thing is going to be parents from the 1980s. Okay. I feel like maybe because of the PSAs, but parents were. There was forever some new thing that was going to hurt you, or warp you, which was amazing how much freedom we had as kids in the 80s.
That's right.
But so for my parents, there was 2 things I can remember. There was Dungeons and Dragons,
of course,
and there was rock music.
Yeah. Okay.
For a while. Now, I mean, if you've heard me talk for any, I didn't grow up in the town that Footloose was filmed in. It wasn't like that. But it
seems like.
But it was just one of the things where my parents started seeing me, reading fantasy books and then Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And of course, all those articles started coming out. It was like, you're going to go down to the sewers. Like, what about me would make you think I'd go down to the sewer? Well, this book's going to make you do it. I'm like,
right. Those were the people who wrote those things were the ones who, in the 60s, were all on LSD. So
it's got to be.
They were dropping acid, and then by the time they got to the 80s, they had lost their mind.
Yeah, and then with the music, it was this music's going to make you do it. Who's making it?
Backmasking. Yeah, smoke marijuana.
Yeah, and so it just I feel like there was probably more than that, but those were the 2 big things that I remember parents kind of getting in a twist about. When I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, and probably nothing to do with Twisted Sister. We're not going to take it, and I just want to rock. I mean, those. Which again, talking about videos that became important in the 80s. Those really address that issue of those parents you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Who just won't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another great song.
Yeah.
Different genre, but another great song.
That's right. Good. Okay. So parents of the 80s. Yeah. No, I think that's
just like the moral crusades. I think that, to be more specific, the moral crusades that parents in the 80s had.
That's right.
We've got new ones now.
No, we have helicopter parents now.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So you had Tipper Gore and
and the other PMRC, I think it was.
Yeah, that's right. The parents, whatever.
Yeah. Parents making other people's
bad
choices.
decisions. Yeah. That was good. Okay. All right. So parents in the 80s, they struggled. They struggled in the 80s. All right. So I'm going to go next with. So this is, I think, my third least favorite thing from the 80s is the soft drink Tab. Tab. Yeah. So here's what would happen in the 80s. If you didn't grow up in the 80s and you were ever sick, so you just didn't get sick in the 80s, because if you did and you had to stay home from school, then you had to watch the soap operas, which were terrible. You did get to watch a little bit of The Price is Right and see Bob Barker flirt with all of the girls that were on there.
Yeah.
Maybe a little Family Feud, but then you had to drink Tab, and it was this idea from my mom. I guess it was just the thought that Tab would make you well.
Really?
That's what I thought for the longest time. Now that I'm an adult and grown and I have parents, I realized it was the way to make you so miserable at home that you were going to go to school the next time you felt sick, no matter what. So in the 80s, you never pretended to be sick to stay home from school. Because if you did, you had to drink Tab. And I don't know that Tab exists anymore, but it was absolutely awful. If you ever go to have you ever been to the Coke Museum, the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta?
I have not.
You ever been? You ought to go sometime.
Yeah.
So the Coca-Cola Museum has every one of the soft drinks from around the world that Coke makes. And so they have like Coca-Cola from South America and from Africa and all. So it all. But they have one of the drinks there. It's infamous. It's called the Beverly. I think it's from Italy. So you get to the little Italian section, and it's nearly as bad as Tab. Tab is like motor oil.
Tab was really bad.
It was terrible.
I agree with you. But I remember the diet soda craze in the 80s, and Tab was part of that.
That's right.
Because
started it.
Because I don't know what Tab's claim to fame was. Was it sugar free or 0 calories or something?
I don't know.
Because there was Tab,
zero taste.
There was Diet Right, which was another awful drink.
Yeah.
And then there was Coke and Pepsi, Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi, which you could learn to like.
Yeah.
It was definitely an acquired taste, but it had this strange aftertaste.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And I still don't like diet soda. If I'm going to have to drink diet soda, I'll always have no soda.
Just give me water.
water.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, Tab was bad.
Tab was tough.
You're right. You are right about that. Now, my parents never did had to drink that when I was sick. I'd love to talk with your mom and find out why.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I'll ask her. Why did I have to drink so much?
Why is she playing the deep game of, okay, I know he doesn't like this, so I'm going to make him drink this when he's sick. Therefore,
3D chess. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah. So Tab was bad.
Yeah.
All right. So my next thing is going to be I don't know how to put it, but the casual. So, some things that were really wrong with movies or TV shows that today we would no, we're not going to have that in TV shows. So we had racism, we had whether you want to call it sexism, violence against
misogyny,
casual violence. And a lot of the movies, which I really do enjoy the movies, have these scenes in them which are just wildly inappropriate today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just wildly inappropriate.
That's right. Yeah, office harassment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like in every movie seemed to have it. And it really kind of is a reflection of how we thought or what we thought was okay or acceptable as a culture back then. And now I'm kind of embarrassed by it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you think of the movie 9 to 5, for example. The whole premise was, harassment and inappropriate conduct in the office.
Absolutely. And it's funny how many movies that you look back and are like, wow, that's a good movie, but that would never be made today.
No, couldn't do it today.
Blazing Saddles is a perfect example. We would never make that movie today. Nor should we.
No, that's right. And a lot of the songs even. Whether it's Korn or Prince or these are just
even Purple Rain.
Sting.
Purple Rain would have several scenes cut out of it nowadays.
That's right.
So yeah. Yeah, so that's something that definitely has changed for the better.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I think you're right. Those inappropriate parts of pop culture in the 80s that were acceptable.
Yeah.
That fortunately aren't acceptable any longer.
Right.
No, that's good. That's good. All right. So I'll go next with, so as great as the music was in the 1980s, there were always these bands that were terrible, but somehow made it.
Okay.
And so there's one in particular, and so I'm going to group all of these kind of like punk bands, if you will, into under the umbrella of the Eurythmics.
Okay.
Annie Lennox and the Eurythmics, which were now it probably anytime that song comes on the radio, it's Here Comes the Rain Again, which was their most famous one. My wife, she just loses. She's scratching the windows and everything to try to get out.
Oh, really?
I think it's her absolute least favorite song. If she were ever to be kidnapped and they played that, that would be the worst torture imaginable. I don't feel that way about it, but it represents a part of the 80s and 80s music, which I have always found to be so wonderful, that I struggle with.
Okay.
So the Eurythmics and that kind of genre of punk music, if you will, that wasn't my favorite. So one of my least favorite things from the 80s.
Okay, like who else would be
So
in
the Flock of Seagulls.
Okay.
When you think about Culture Club, Boy George and Culture Club, the early Wham, that whole kind of where there's a pop punk side to what they're doing.
Part of that new wave.
New wave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. So yeah, Flock of Seagulls to me had that one hit. I Ran,
Right.
which was a fine song at the time.
Yep.
The Eurythmics, I remember them being in heavy rotation like that Friday night video.
Oh yeah.
Thing.
No
So
doubt.
so I got to see Here Comes the Rain Again, and they had another one, Sweet Dreams.
Sweet Dreams.
And visually they were a very exciting band because on screen visually they really present themselves in an interesting light. I'm kind of with you as far as the music goes. I don't like if those songs come on the stations that I'm listening to, like the 80 stations or like the hits of whenever. Usually I'll click off because I think because I've heard the song so many times over my life, and they've never been in my favorite category.
Yeah.
I don't feel as strongly as you do about them. Certainly no work with Ginger.
Yeah.
So okay,
Well, and I think the videos are what made them, and that there were a lot of you had the song that video killed the radio star.
Yeah.
But I think there were some videos that made the radio star,
Absolutely.
and that genre. That new wave genre is probably made for the video world.
Yeah, and I think that the Eurythmics specifically, I think that they were all the bands that you mentioned. I think they were a lot bigger in Europe than they were here.
Right. That's a good point.
Because I think a lot of those albums went like gold here, but were multi-platinum there. And because like the discotheque culture was a really big thing there, whereas that was really like the nightlife, the clubs and stuff were really winding down here.
Right.
Other than a couple in New York, a couple in LA.
Yeah, sure.
In everywhere else, that just wasn't really a thing here. Whereas that was a big part of the culture there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Great point. Great point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you're right. As great as the music was in the 80s, some of it was
And some elements.
Yeah, it's got some elements. So that does lead me to one more question before we move on. So, worst song for Ginger, Doves Cry or Here Comes the Rain Again?
Here Comes the Rain Again is worse. Now they compete with one another. She doesn't like Doves Cry either by Prince, but and she'll change it. She's sort of like you with maybe Sweet Dreams or something. She'll change the channel when Doves Cry, but if I really want to just drive her insane in the car, I'll flip over and on Spotify I'll find
it,
the Eurythmics, and I'll make life tough for her that night. So if she's ever mean to me, that's what I'll do in return. Of course, she's never mean, but if that were to happen, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's going to bring me to my last pick, and since neither one of us have talked about it yet, I have a suspicion we both might have the same one, and that's okay. It's a big enough topic where we can both have it. It would be the Cold War.
Yep.
That's something that was very strange growing up in the 80s and kind of living with that. And it's interesting as I talk to people who are much older than me now and how they felt being adults in that time. There was a genuine fear that we were going to go to war that Russia and America were going to go to war, or we were going to come into a World War III, which probably meant nuclear.
That's right.
I find it fascinating now with the Freedom of Information Act how much stuff is coming out that really America and Russia had no plans whatsoever to go to war with each other.
No.
I looked at the movie Red Dawn as a realistic scenario.
You better believe it. That's right.
And everybody, like on both sides, everybody's like, there was never a time where anybody thought that Russian troops were going to enter the United States mainland or vice versa. Yeah. But they both used the fear order to have, do military spending. Which was just awful. Because I remember specifically doing in our civics class or social studies, whatever you wanted to call it, in grade school, a whole section on nuclear war.
Yeah.
And doing like nuclear war drills where we would hide under our desk. As if that was going
to protect you. Exactly. But we did all the time.
We did those things. It was crazy.
Yeah. And I think that's where, say, Red Dawn came from. I remember in junior high school, before Red Dawn came out, envisioning that, sitting in class and seeing Russian troops out on the football field attacking our school. I mean, people, and this reason why that movie was made. Was because people really did have that fear, and that was my fifth least favorite thing from the 80s as well, was the Cold War, because it affected so much of the way that you thought, the way you perceived the world, and in a sense, I wonder if that, in a good way, didn't contribute to our at least seeing everybody in America on the same team, unlike maybe today, where we had this common enemy that we were opposed to, but the anxiety and the fear, it made its way into not just movies, but music as well. And, the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick was, it was. And it was, but everybody thought that was real.
Oh, yeah.
And the fear that there could be a nuclear war was always on your mind, because we practiced what would happen if we were under nuclear attack, and fortunately the desks were supposed to protect us. But that was a challenging part of the 80s, to be sure.
Maybe that's why the school classrooms were painted with lead paint.
Oh, right. To protect you from nuclear fallout.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
But it's wild, because like when I talk with my father, a lot of what he grew up with was like the Cowboys.
Right, yeah.
Playing Cowboys and Indians or whatever, as inappropriate as that is as well.
Right.
But like his toys were like the gun belt with the pistols and stuff, and we had those a little bit. But for us, like the big thing was like get the toy M16, which when you pulled the trigger, it made like the sound and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was realistically modeled and everything. Of course, we don't have those anymore either. But it was like that Cold War was affecting every part of the culture.
Yep.
And I remember watching a documentary the other night talking about how gym class from about World War I through the Cold War was really in public schools to make people physically fit enough to join the military. That was really the goal of gym class.
Wow.
It was to teach kids sportsmanship and teach them these games and stuff, but really it was to have a minimum level of physical activity. So if there was a draft or something, and it's that's a nice byproduct of that not being there. I mean, of course, we don't have gym class anymore in schools. I would like that to come back, but for a different reason. Get back to the sportsmanship, to the activity outside.
I remember in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, playing a lot of the Cowboys and Indians type games. But as the 80s went on, it really became more war. You really perceived yourself as shooting and killing the enemy, and you would have the fake guns, even if they were water guns. They weren't water gun pistols, so they were light military weapons. And so it shaped a kind of a military culture for a lot of people growing up in the 80s. And there are probably some elements of that military culture which are good, but by and large, just being in the midst of the Cold War was certainly a low point in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful to those who, as political leaders during that time, really helped to shepherd people through. But it was a tough time.
It was tough,
So the Cold War, that's a good one. We ended on the same one there. That's a big one, though.
It is.
That's a big one. So the 80s were a great time and a tough time at the same time. So.
They were, and I think those challenges made what was good so much better.
That's right.
Made the colors so much brighter, neon.
Yeah, there you go. Lots of neon.
So, All right, so I think that's going to wrap up.
I think that's it.
You did 5, I did 5. We shared the Cold War. So what did we get right? What would be on your list that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, and maybe not only the 80s, but even in the 90s. Whenever you were a kid, what were the things that really stood out to you?
Yeah.
Kind of give us an idea of what those were and how they maybe compared with what our experience had been back in the 80s. And be sure that you hit the like button and that subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit the notification bell so that you hear every time that we post one of these videos. And you can share this with your friends and pass it along to other people, social media and other places, so that they can be a part of the conversation as well. And we really do want to hear from you, hear what your thoughts are, your suggestions, your ideas, and what are some of the things you'd like to hear us talk about, because we'll discuss anything.
Yeah.
We discuss it all, Paul.
That's right.
So whatever it is you'd like to hear us talk about, we'd love to discuss those things. So.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.